What did Kurt Cobain know about fame? Everybody wants to be authentic, but nobody wants to actually pay the cost of authenticity. As an idea, authenticity is enormously appealing. It is the unfiltered self. It is the person who says what they actually think all the time and makes what they actually feel and refuses to compromise for the work that the audience demands of them. In theory, I think it is the highest form of creative integrity that a human can apply to their life. But in practice, it is one of the most brutal positions that a person can occupy, because the moment genuine authenticity meets genuine scale of fame, something breaks, and it has to break. It is an unparalleled comparison between the two. It is either the authenticity or the person, and Kurt Cobain is the prime example. He grew up in Aberdeen in Washington. It was a small town in a broken home, and it was the specific kind of adolescent loneliness that produces either numbness and suicide or incredible art, as we've seen. He chose art. He chose to create instead of to consume. And he made music that came entirely from the inside of his heart, the inside of his soul. The anxiety, the self-loathing, and the tenderness and the rage. All of it was unmediated and unmistakably true. Never mind, the album was released in 1991, and within months it sold over 30 million copies. Kurt Cobain had not created a product. Instead, he had created a feeling and made himself available to 30 million people. That distinction is everything, because nowadays we see artists such as, I don't want to name names, but Drake, right? He released 3 albums within one day. But is there any genuine soul in a single one of those songs? In my opinion, I don't see a single bit of artistry or creativity in that music. However, Kurt Cobain sold himself. He sold parts of himself in that album. When you make something that comes directly from your heart and the inside of your soul, the world receives it at a completely different scale than any other kind of art. Something strange and irreversible completely happens, and the self that produced the work gets completely overwhelmed. It becomes public property at that scale. 30 million people, imagine that, 30 million people buying the album that you wrote out of your entire body, you wrote out of your entire distinction of humanity. People start to feel as if they know you. Not the version of you that actually exists in the rooms or in the relationships or in the ordinary privacy of a life, but instead the version of you that exists in the work itself. And they love that version with such a ferocity and a ferociousness that has nothing to do with you as a person, and instead everything to do with what they needed the work itself to be. Kurt Cobain told people that he found this unbearable, and not because he was a fragile person, but because he was so attentive to his work. He wrote in his journals about the specific horror of becoming a symbol, becoming a famous symbol of humanity, of watching his work that he had made from a place of genuine pain be consumed as entertainment or as background noise or as the soundtrack to other people's adolescence. He understood that his performance of authenticity for audiences who wanted the rawness without understanding what it had cost to produce it would have broken him eventually, and the gap between what he was trying to say and what people were hearing was simply widening. He called Nirvana a joke in his interviews. He dismissed the work so much repeatedly, and not out of false modesty or humility, but instead out of the genuine distress of a person who had given absolutely everything and watched it be misread at scale. The authenticity that made the work itself possible also made the fame impossible to survive at any scale. And that is the part that most people ignore when they romanticize authenticity. The assumption that underneath the romanticization that being genuinely yourself will be received as genuinely yourself or as a great person, or that if you make something real, the people themselves will understand it as real. It creates the right kind of audience and the deep kind of work and the kind that sees you accurately. Sometimes it maybe at a small scale, in the right rooms, with the right people, filtered out to the maximum, authenticity may produce exactly that. But at the scale that Kurt Cobain reached, it produced something completely different. It produced something completely polarizing to what we just talked about. It produced a million different projections, a million people seeing in the work what they needed to see rather than what was actually there presentable to them. It was a million people loving a version of Kurt Cobain that was assembled from their own minds or their own needs and had almost nothing to do with the person who actually wrote the songs themselves. And the person underneath all the projection, the genuine actual Kurt Cobain, with his stomach condition and his self-doubt and his genuine love of music and his specific, irreducible humanness, humanity, that person became increasingly invisible as the symbol Kurt Cobain grew. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote that hell is other people. He meant something exact, he meant something precise by that statement. He didn't mean it in a theoretical sense. Not that other people are unpleasant to be around, but instead that the gaze of another person fixes you. It fixes you into a position. It turns you into an object, and it reduces the infinite complexity that you are into a finite thing that they can hold and categorize and read and understand and use to the way they need to. Multiply that gaze of one singular person by 30 million different people and you begin to, actually you may not even begin to comprehend, but maybe, just very maybe, you'll understand a 0.01% of what was happening to Kurt Cobain. Authenticity is not a brand to be built upon. It is not a content strategy to upload. I know my videos may seem authentic in a sense, the fact that they're raw, they're unedited or unfiltered. However, authenticity is not something to be idolized or to create an idol over. It is not the aesthetic of rawness performed for an audience that has been told that the rawness is valuable, but instead it is the specific, costly, completely unglamorous practice of remaining yourself under pressure of the world, under pressure of hundreds of millions of people watching you and paying to see you perform. It is continuing to make what you actually feel in your soul when what you actually feel is inconvenient and uncomfortable and misread from the people who think that they understand you as a person. It is maintaining the gap between what you yourself genuinely are and what people need you to be or form you to be or shape you to be, and living in that gap without losing yourself to this side or that side. Kurt Cobain was completely unable to manage the gap, and unfortunately we saw what ended up happening to him. Very, very, very few people who reach that scale while maintaining their genuine being of self are able to. Off the top of my head, I don't think I can name a single example of someone who was authentic, who created incredible art and somehow managed to keep themselves authentic while scaling themselves to hundreds of millions of people. If you know one, please let me know, because maybe I'll make a whole video about their mindset. Now, the question that romanticization never asks about authenticity, that the romanticizing of the genuinity of humanity never asks. I'm just talking now. And the question that Kurt Cobain's life forces on other people as a whole, or on anyone who ever actually sits with his music seriously, is not whether or not you want to be authentic, but instead it's whether or not you have any idea what authenticity would cost on you.